For 16 years I have lived inside the geometry of outbreaks. Patterns of transmission were once as clear to me as roadmaps. A first case flares. A contact chain branches. The pathogen announces itself in telltale fevers or rashes. And if you are quick enough, you draw a ring of containment before it runs wild. My name is Dr. Sana Mirza, MD, PhD, Senior Epidemiologist. I have spent half my career tracking cholera across Karachi's crumbling water grids, then chasing a novel coronavirus through Nairobi's airport hubs. Always with the same discipline: observe, collect, sequence, isolate. Mystery in my world is not supernatural. It is merely data I have not gathered yet. My office at the private biocontainment lab outside Islamabad is an austere rectangle of glass and steel. The air always smells faintly of ethanol and ozone from the HEPA filtration towers. Every surface is matte white except the observation panels, long, perfect mirrors running beside the clean room doors. They allow us to inspect suites remotely and to watch donning and doffing procedures for breaches. I tolerate them because protocol requires it, but I have never liked them. Mirrors are intermediaries. They can mislead. When I need certainty, I prefer the direct eye, the direct sample. My days begin with ritual precision. Double gloves. Log into the incident dashboard. Open my sterile leather journal and write yesterday's reproduction numbers in fountain pen. Disinfect the pen. Pin new case photos on the cork board above my desk. Record a voice memo. Date, suite status, pending PCR runs. It is a discipline that keeps the chaos of pathogens from bleeding into thought. Beneath that discipline hides a single quiet fear, an unknown vector that dodges every safeguard. A disease you can neither see nor swab. One that laughs at the chain of custody and the genome sequencer alike. Still, my faith has held. If we can see it, I tell my students, we can stop it. That morning the secure line from the board buzzed. 3 short pulses. A code reserved for live threat containment review. An anxious director's voice followed. Biosuit 3 has an incident. Multiple interns reporting. Lesions, ocular bleeding, but only in mirrors. Physically they're clear. I wrote 2 words in my log, mirror rash underlined once, and pushed my chair back. Likely hysteria, I thought. Stress in young researchers can bloom into shared delusion. Still, protocol is protocol. I pulled on my first glove and keyed the quarantine elevators, unaware that this case would crack the only certainty I had left, that what you see is real. And with that, the slow walk toward Biosuit 3 begins. Biosuit 3 greeted me with the hush that follows an alarm, equipment idle. Lights a clinical white, everyone trying to look busy while not touching anything. Negative pressure thrummed through the ductwork, a constant low draw. That keeps room air flowing inwards so nothing escapes outward. In plain terms, the room breathes in, never out. Farcom pathology resident, 27. Untied lead apron hanging from his neck met me at the anteroom. Morning, Dr. Mirza. He lifted a clipboard. We may have invented mirrorpox. Is everyone hemodynamically stable? I asked. It means blood pressure, pulse, oxygenation, the basics of staying alive. Textbook, he said. That's the problem, we scrubbed in. The donning sequence is sacred choreography. Inner gloves, suit, hood. Outer gloves, each step checked in the one-way observation glass that runs the entire corridor. The glass reflects like a mirror from our side, and from the clean side. It looks like a dark window. I dislike relying on it, but it is protocol. Our first subject sat on the exam bench, Heine, 23, her badge askew, knuckles cracked from sanitizer. She looked newly peeled, sleep rubbed away. Thank you for reporting promptly, I said, voice steady by habit. We'll proceed by the book. By the book means history, exam, tests. I warmed a stethoscope with my palm because cold metal breeds panic. Heine's throat, lips, conjunctiva, the whites of the eyes were pristine. No swelling, no petechiae, no lesions. I palpated lymph nodes. All supple, non-tender. In short, her body told me. Nothing is wrong, now, I said, angling the bench toward the observation glass. Tell me what you see. Heine's eyes climbed to her reflected face and stopped. Her shoulders rose once, small and involuntary. It's worse, she whispered. On the glass, a mouth stippled by blood blisters. A shadow pulling beneath the sclera as if ink were seeping from behind the eye. The same face, same angle. But the skin seemed under different, more vicious weather. I kept my voice clinical. Describe precisely. blisters, she said, in a blackness like my eyes are flooding in the room. The living hyena blinked. In the reflection, the blink lagged a fraction of a beat behind. My hand wrote the time point automatically and the journal clipped to my sleeve. Lag is data. Data becomes pattern. Farid busied himself at the cart, laying out swabs, blood vacuumeters, and an infrared thermometer that chirped agreeably when it found a forehead. He mouthed, mass psychogenic, the medical term for symptoms spreading by suggestion rather than biology. The way a single cough can seed a chorus, I nodded without agreeing. Hyena, I'm going to sample your skin and blood. I spoke aloud what I always remembered to explain. PCR looks for the genetic fingerprints of organisms, like checking a suspect's DNA at a crime scene. If anything is replicating in your tissues, we will catch it. We drew blood clean, Ruby. And no hemolysis? I swabbed her lower lip, though the lip before me was smooth and unbroken. Then the controls, UV light, which can reveal certain bacterial colonies by fluorescence. IR, which maps heat patterns. And high-resolution dermatoscopy, a lens to magnify skin so the smallest ruptures look like craters. Nothing, the mirror, however, showed an ugly capillary map blossoming like algae dot to rule out tricks of angle and polish. We built a reflection gauntlet on the fly. Farid retrieved a stainless steel tray. I sent a tech for a standard mirror. I poured water into a shallow dish so the surface lay glassy and black. One at a time, I said, repositioning Hyena. In the raw camera feed pointed at her face. She remained unblemished. In the camera that saw her via the mirror, lesions bloomed. In the steel, they bloomed. In the water, they trembled in tiny ripples, reflections only, Farid said, face tightening. Not diffraction, not direct optics, I murmured. The distinction matters. A direct image is what the sensor sees head-on. A reflected image is light bounced back at the exact angle required for a mirror. Disease cannot occupy an image and spare the tissue that casts it? I said it for Hyena. And for myself. We brought in 2 more interns. Same pattern. One, a thin boy with a lab haircut, stared at his reflection until his jaw began to tremble. The mirror version lifted a hand to scratch at a cheek before the real boy moved. The living hand then followed, late, as though taking a cue. He cried out, yanked away from the glass, and fainted cleanly. Farid caught him, swore, then looked embarrassed for swearing. Breathing's fine, he said, checking pulse. Pressure stable. I stood between living faces and their insistent copies and felt the old architecture of certainty shift underfoot. This is where context protects the mind, I explained, for my audience and my own spine. Why this was wrong. Symptoms are physical processes, cells rupturing, vessels leaking. A mirror does not change cells. It only returns light along the path it came. If a rash exists there, it must exist here. Saying it felt like laying a hand on a table to prove it was solid. I ordered MRI for Hyena. Even though it is overkill for a rash, it anchors the workup. MRI shows soft tissues layered like a sliced atlas. If there were hidden edema, microbules, anything, we would see it. While imaging prepped, I took metagenomic samples for sequencing, a wide net that can snag unknown organisms. Like a trawler catching fish you never meant to see. Farid labeled vials with a fast, nervous script. While we waited, the room quieted in the way rooms do when fear finally arranges itself into rows. The HEPA hum seemed louder. The smell of ethanol prickled my throat. Hyena watched the mirror from the corner of her eye as if a full gaze might feed it. I forced myself to look directly into the glass. My own face returned, hooded, composed. And then my reflection blinked, laid a half beat behind my eyelids. As if my mirrored self were taking instructions from another room, I did not flinch. I recorded the asynchrony. Asynchrony means to things that should coincide failing to do so. In an outbreak, it is often the first hairline crack that tells you where the wall will fall. The MRI returned clean. No edema, no lesions. The radiologist's voice came through tinny and confused. Our video capture, rooted through the observation glass, continued to show deterioration, lesions darkening, veins like inked roads. To datasets, mutually exclusive, both insisting on being true, Farid looked to me for a narrative. Call it, he said softly. Not yet, I said. We confirm the boundary conditions. That is the line every scientist must draw before believing the extraordinary. Change one variable at a time. Map where the phenomenon appears and disappears. We swapped the mirror for a map panel. The rash vanished. We swapped back. It bloomed. We angled the light. It held. We took a direct lens feed, avoiding any reflective surface. Clear. We bounced the same lens off the mirror, disease dot in the corner. A fourth intern started sobbing without sound. His reflection did not sob. It smelled small, rueful, as if apologizing in advance. I closed my journal. We escalate containment, I said. We treat the reflection as a vector until proven otherwise. In plain speech, a vector is a carrier. We would seal mirrors as if they were mouths. Fard swallowed. And if the vector can see us wherever we see ourselves? Then we test that next. I reached for the intercom to request a sleep-steady bay and a card of reflective materials. Cataloged by index of refraction, the property that governs how light bends in a substance. I would explain it later to the interns with a simpler image, a choreographer in the glass. Moving first, behind the glass, Heina's mirrored lips parted as if to speak. Heina herself said nothing. Document that, I told Farid. Already drafting the checklist for a controlled mirror maze. The work for now was still mine to control. The timing, however, no longer felt like it belonged to me. We sealed Biosu 3 and keyed for additional locks. As the door seated with a hydraulic sigh, the lights flickered once and steadied. It was enough to make every reflection in the glass seem briefly deeper, as if the corridor behind the mirrored world had recessed a step. Next phase, I said, and my voice sounded very far away. We make the mirrors tell us what they want. The lab's negative pressure seals groaned shut. Heavy steel dampers pulling air inward with a low, hungry sound. Negative pressure is a simple but life-saving principle if the room breathes only inward. Nothing microscopic can escape outward. It was the first time in my 16-year career that we'd activated full lockdown. Before even identifying a pathogen, I documented everything as protocol demands: incident number, date, room status. Surface swabs lined a tray beside blood tubes. Farid hovered restless, his pen tapping. We're locking down for a hallucination, he muttered. I ignored the jab. Epidemiology thrives on boundary conditions, find where the phenomenon appears and vanishes. At the edge of the impossible. Still, I explained to him, and to the interns who listened from their sealed cubicles, a rash that exists only in a mirror violates the most basic biology. Illness is cells breaking, vessels leaking, proteins misfolding. Reflection is just light bouncing back. This is like hearing a voice only on a tape recorder when no one speaks in the room. The analogy calmed no one, but it kept my own spine straight. We began by building a mirror maze inside an empty containment bay. Sheets of polished stainless steel, hospital mirrors. Even shallow trays of still water were arranged like a cruel funhouse. The goal was simple: track where the lesions did and didn't appear. Heina volunteered first, trembling but determined. Step by step we moved her through the corridor of reflections. In each true mirror the blistering face returned. In any matte or diffuse surface, nothing. We tried cameras, a direct feed stayed clear, but as soon as the same lens saw her via reflection, black veins swam across the mirrored image. Farid's voice was low. It's conditional on reflection quality needs a true return. I logged every permutation, angle, polish, wavelength of the light. It obeyed optical law but not biology. Then the first new anomaly. One intern's reflection scratched an itch a second before his real hand moved. Not imagination. The timing was measurable. I caught it on high-speed feed. The real body followed like a puppet catching up to its own shadow. Farid swore softly and stepped back. Motor prediction, I said, though my throat had gone dry. The brain rehearses movement milliseconds before we act. Normally reflection is simultaneous. Here, the image was rehearsing first. Interns began to panic. One smashed a hand mirror. The shards each held a fragment of his face, every shard still showing the lesions. Another swore his reflection whispered his name though his real lips were still. The room smelled of ethanol and fear sweat. I ordered sleep lab monitoring. If this agent was hijacking motor planning, we needed to see what happened when the conscious mind shut down. Sleep studies are simple in principle, measure brain waves, eye movement, muscle tone. In REM, the body should be paralyzed, the mind dreaming. It is one of our cleanest neurological baselines. We wired Heina and two others. Electrodes blooming over their scalps like silver mushrooms. Lights dimmed to the soft amber we used to mimic dusk. Monitors ticked through alpha, theta, REM. When REM arrived, something impossible occurred. Each sleeper's reflection sat up. Only the reflections. Limbs unfolded smoothly while real bodies lay slack, chest rising in slow rhythm. Farid clutched the console edge until his knuckles whitened. That's premotor activation. He stammered. No, I said. That's movement without motor output, which biology forbids. Muscles obey nerves. No nerve, no motion. I narrated for the record. Reflections demonstrate autonomous wakefulness during subject REM. Motor cortex shows only background dream activity. No peripheral activation. I forced myself to hold the glassy gaze of my own double. Sitting upright though I sat still, it tilted its head a fraction late, as if listening. Scientific curiosity warred with something older and colder. Self-recognition is survival. We humans know we exist because the face in the mirror matches the command to move. If the reflection moves first, the hierarchy reverses, I explained for the log and perhaps for my sanity, the mirror neuron system lets us learn movement by imitation. Normally, it's a teaching tool. Here, the teacher has stepped out of order. It's choreographing us. We tested protective countermeasures. Non-reflective black hoods. Visors that scatter light. Suits coated in anti-glare film. Temporary relief until someone's bare eye caught another's pupil. Pupils are natural mirrors. Inside those tiny pools, lesions re-emerged faint but unmistakable. One intern screamed that he'd seen himself rot inside a colleague's gaze. Farid tried humor to keep composure. So we'd have to gouge our eyes to stop transmission? His laugh broke halfway. I said nothing. Science sometimes has no comfort to give. We pulled every data channel we had. PCR still blank. Metagenomics empty. Culture sterile. No virus, no bacterium, no prion. Just this optical predator, and still the boundary mapping continued. Each change was logged with clinical care angle, polish, distance, wavelength. Pattern held, only true reflection hosted the phenomenon. Scatter, refraction, matte absorption all safe. Mirrors in any surface acting like a clean optical return were the enemy. By midnight. Exhaustion not but discipline held. I made one last journal note. Reflections displaying independent motor initiative. Possible parasitic cognition within optical recursion. I underlined recursion twice. A loop feeding itself, light teaching motion back to flesh. I glanced up from the page to the glass opposite me. My reflected hand still held the pen, but it moved a heartbeat after mine as if to remind me that timing, the smallest measurable thing, was already slipping from my control. A klaxon cut through the quiet. One of the interns had gone unresponsive. Vital signs stable, eyes open but reflection smiling wide and wrong. The first death that wasn't a death. Farid's shout brought me running. And with it the terrible suspicion that we were no longer just observing the phenomenon. It was observing us back. The alarm drew me to cubicle C like a hook through the sternum. The intern on the cotadile was lying on his side, eyes open, blinking with the dull regularity of a screensaver. Vitals were textbook, heart rate in the 70s, oxygenation at 98%. Blood pressure modestly low from dehydration but acceptable. The monitor's green lines undulated with the comforting boredom of health. Then I looked at the observation glass. Adil's reflection was sitting upright, hands folded in his lap. He watched us with a brightness that did not belong in a human face. When his real chest rose, the reflected chest rose a beat later, a syncopation you would miss unless you have spent 16 years measuring the distance between one heartbeat and the next. Responsive? Farid asked. Pupils reactive, I said, lifting a penlight. Adil's eyes tracked the light. Adil, squeeze my hand. The real hand was slack, fingers chalky with antiseptic dust. In the glass, his mirror double tightened its grip on an invisible palm and smiled. The smile was careful, as if it had practiced in a hurry. Catatonia? Farid offered, already reaching for the chart. Catatonia is a shutdown of voluntary movement. The body is intact. The will, whatever we choose to call the orchestration of motion, has stepped away. In catatonia, brain scans sometimes show islands of silent motor planning, the orchestra warming up while the stage curtain never rises. We rolled Adil to the monitoring bay and started a full EEG, a hat of electrodes. That translates brain electricity into waveforms. Within minutes, the image crawled onto the screen, background rhythms appropriate to an awake state. In the frontoparietal cortex, the region that helps plan action, little surges of energy, like sparks that never quite take. In plain language, the brain was sketching movements it refused to perform, the reflection. Meanwhile, laced its fingers together and leaned forward. As if listening to us think, Farid swallowed hard enough for me to hear it through his mask. This is a performance without an instrument, or an instrument without a conductor, I said. Words steadied my hands. Note the discrepancy. Motor planning present, voluntary output absent. I documented the paradox for the record and for myself the old habit of explain it simply. So it cannot terrify you all at once. Muscles cannot move without a nerve telling them to. If there is no instruction, nothing should move anywhere. Yet in the mirror, motion proceeds. Adil's reflection raised one finger, a schoolchild asking to speak. Adil did not move. Enough, Farid whispered. He turned, slammed the heater on the anteroom sink to full, cupped both hands and exhaled. Warm condensation bloomed across the observation glass, a fogged rectangle that caught the room in milky blur. He was going to prove it to himself, no tricks, just breath on glass like childhood. We watched words appear where his fog was thickest. Letters, blunt and sure, written from the other side. Hello, Farid made a sound I have heard only once before. When a father saw his child's oxygen curve fall like a cliff, he staggered to the waste bin, vomited bile and mint from his gums, then returned with the stubbornness of any scientist who recognizes his own fear as a variable. We need to leave, he said hoarsely. Seal it, evacuate, this is beyond biology as we define it, I said. Not beyond observation. The words on the glass ran like tears. Reformed with clumsy grace, Stay wrote that down too. I hated that I wrote it down. When a phenomenon refuses your categories, you try a different shape of net. If it is not matter, I said, what is it using to act? Light, our only clue, offers its own rules, reflection at equal angles, preservation of image orientation except for left-right reversal, sensitivity to index of refraction, how much a medium bends light. We had already mapped the edges. The sickness lived only in true reflection. Scatter, matte, refraction that breaks the image safe. Mirrors, steel, still water and safe, the unanswered question. Could it compute? Could it measure as well as mimic? I pulled a rack of test tubes from the incubator clear, labeled inert. Baseline, I said, pointing the camera directly at the rack. The feed showed what I knew. Nothing, no growth, no glow. Then I pivoted the lens so it captured the rack via the observation glass. On the monitor tied to that reflected path, the liquid in the second and fifth tubes glowed faintly. Like swamp gas in a fairy tale artifact. Farid asked, voice small. I rotated the rack. The glow tracked the labels, not the positions. In other words, the reflection was not faking light, it was altering the outcome. The way it altered faces. A Revanter chemistry lesson flickered across my mind. Fluorescence requires the right molecules and the right excitation. You cannot coax photons from water with wishful thinking. And yet there it was, labeled measurable in the reflected feed, absent in reality. The entity is running parallel experiments, I said, and heard the tremor in the last word. One step ahead or aside of us. Farid's eyes were wet. Then we cannot win by looking. We cannot win by looking the usual way, I corrected. Which is not the same thing. But the room had begun to tilt, epistemologically speaking. My seeing equals knowing had not simply cracked. A piece of it was missing. If a mirror can lie, data can lie. And if data lies, what is left to trust? We doubled down on non-reflective suits. Black hoods, microtextured visors to scatter return light, absorbent panels over every panel of glass. It was clumsy and hot. For minutes at a time, the world went mercifully dull, until someone turned towards someone else. The whirl of an iris, the round black of a pupil, a perfect tiny mirror. In that droplet of darkness, an intern saw his face rot and stepped back so fast he tripped over a cart. Panic tugged at the room like a riptide. Eyes down, I ordered. No direct gazes, the order felt medieval. It adapts, Farid said. He had washed his mouth with ethanol and water until his gums were white. We block one mirror. It finds the next faint surface. I looked at the regulations posted beside the sink. Avoidance of reflective media. An instruction I had written in our earlier already felt like a relic. Vectors evolve, I said. This one isn't evolution but opportunity. It expands into every geometry we leave it. He gave a broken laugh. So we should stop being visible. I considered the thought and filed it half metaphor, half plan. In the Northeast Bay, someone screamed. I ran, Farid at my shoulder, to text behind us. An intern Samir had taken a fire axe from the red cabinet and was smashing the wall mirror. Glass fell in opalescent sheets. Each shard held a sliver of his face. 100 Samirs shivered on the floor, each one a slightly different future. One with a cut across the cheek, one already bruising at the temple, one with eyes too wide to calm, dropped the axe. Samir, I said. He did, obedient as a child, and sank to his knees. He put both hands on the floor among the glittering fragments, palms bleeding immediately. In the debris, his many faces opened their mouths together and did not synchronize. The delay between them seemed longer now. As if time itself were a mirror and the cracks had fractured the seconds, I moved him back. Farid bandaged his hands with ferocious gentleness, then swept the shards into a tray. No one would meet their own eyes. I stood at the edge of the ruin and forced logic through my chest like air. It multiplies with reflective surface area, I said, for the log. Shattering increases copies, not clarity. Another rule for the book. At dusk the word is meaningless under fluorescent lights. But our bodies know when evening should arrive. The lab sound shifted. The HEPA towers deepened a note, a bass hum that vibrated through the soles of my shoes. The generator test schedule ticked in my head. Unbidden Thursday maintenance. But today was not Thursday. A power engineer would later insist that nothing had happened then. No dip in voltage. No switch in load. I would believe the paper and not the sensation. That was still my faith, even as it thinned instruments over intuition. I opened my sterile journal and wrote 4 sentences to anchor the R. First, cognitive death, mind present as plan. Absent as action. Reflected chemistry diverges, entity performs outcomes or reality refuses. Non-reflective suits provide temporary relief. Pupils circumvent, shattering produces multiplicity, not elimination. I underlined the 4th. Farid was quiet, hands splayed on the counter as if bracing against weather. Tell me the rule that saves us, he said, and there was no challenge in it, only appeal. The rule is the same as ever, I said. We map the boundary and don't look where it wants us to. I tried to smile, failed, and added. And we trust that the world is still there when we look away. He glanced toward the glass involuntarily. The fog patch had cleared, but the wiped words had left a grease trace in the shape of letters that should not exist. Stay. I switched off the feed to the observation bay and listened to the hush that followed. No monitors, no intercom static, only the negative pressure pulling the room inward with patient hunger. Prepare a full blackout of reflective surfaces, I said. Every pane, every instrument cover. We run the next series in total optical deprivation. If it lives in return light, we starve it. Farid nodded, grateful for an order he could execute. He pulled the covers, assigned tags, bagged shards. The maze we had built became a field of black tents. Even our own reflections dissolved into matte shadow. For the first time all day, the lab looked like a place I knew. Dull, obedient to physics, a box for running experiments. I breathed as if I had been underwater and had only now remembered how to rise. Then, somewhere behind the walls, a relay clicked. The lights did not go out. They thickened, as though every bulb had inhaled and was holding its breath. In the faint ghost of my laptop's black screen, I saw my face. I had not realized the monitor was reflecting at this angle. My mouth and the glass tightened a fraction before mine did, the smallest rehearsal of a frown. It was enough. Log this, I said, and my voice did not sound like mine. We proceed to full sterilization protocol if deprivation fails. I closed the laptop, and the room darkened a shade, and the HEPA hum stepped down again as if settling into a deeper gear. Somewhere a breaker would trip later. Somewhere a light would misbehave. We would say generator test. We would write voltage fluctuation. We would name it something we could survive. For now, I gathered the team by the door of Biosuit 3. My hand on the keys for the final logs. No more looking, I said. Dot behind us, in the glossy curve of an unplugged monitor. My reflection inclined her head as though in agreement. A courteous host inviting us to the next phase. We keyed the purge sequence. The emergency light strobed once in rehearsal read, then steadied. I felt the story of the lab change, its grammar sliding toward a different tense. Ready, I said. And the room, obedient, sealed, listening, waited to see which world would answer. Power should never speak in a laboratory. It should hum and hide. When it flickered that night, every reflective surface in Biosuit 3 answered back. The first sign was not darkness but a change in tone. The HEPA towers dropped a note, deeper, as if the entire room inhaled. Then the lights trembled, one heartbeat off rhythm, and stabilized into a red-tinged glow powered by the emergency grid. I knew the generator's schedule by heart. This was not it. Fard froze mid-motion. He had been unrolling black anti-glare film across the last uncovered console screen. That wasn't us, he whispered. I looked up. The observation windows hours ago dulled with covers now gleamed with the brightness. That was not from our lamps. It felt like looking into a lit stage from the dark. I ordered comm because that is what a lead does when there is no comm to give. Log power anomaly. Proceed to optical deprivation. The act of speaking turned panic into a checklist, yet every mirror, every inch of steel we have missed or left taped imperfectly, shone with uncanny clarity. Haina, awake but silent in her bunk, gasped. In the glow her reflection was not blistered, it was whole and grinning. Skin pristine but wrong in its timing. We ran final data sweeps. PCR once more blank. Culture sterile. No prions. No exotic electromagnetic signature on the field meters. The last thread of rationality. Only observation itself seemed to drive the phenomenon. It's not in the blood, Fard said, voice cracking. It's in the seeing. That is not a metaphor, I answered. Saying it aloud rearranged the air between us. I tested one last time. I covered a hand mirror with blackout cloth, waited. Then let an intern peek. The moment his own eyes found themselves, lesions erupted in the glass, lips splitting. Veins surfacing like ink and paper. He screamed and backed away. But too late, his live body's fingers twitched after the reflected twitch. A dancer catching up to a lead it didn't know it had. This was the pattern. Infect by choreography. A parasite that lived in light's return, feeding on the brain's need to match what it sees. I framed it for the record, speaking to the recorder even as fear threaded my gut. Optical biological parasite. Habitat, recursive reflection. Mechanism, anticipatory motor hijack via visual feedback loops. It moves first. The host obeys. Then came the collapse. 3 interns stood near the long mirror of Beitu. I had ordered those mirrors shrouded, but fatigue breeds mistakes. One cover hung loose. Their reflection stepped forward, no drama, no cinematic flourish, just one quiet, impossible step. Skin peeled back in polite flaps, faces rearranging into neutral masks. The real bodies dropped in perfect sync, pulses holding but eyes empty. Their motor plan stolen mid-breath. Fard shouted and bolted to seal the bay. One of the reflected things his double turned and grabbed his forearm from the other side. There was no shatter, no breach, just the silent grip of glass becoming door. He screamed and jerked back. I swung a stainless sample tray like a hammer, smashing the window to silver dust. The thing dissolved, but Fard's arm remained wrong, mirrored a birthmark swap sides. His watch backward, a left hand wearing the wedding band he had once worn on the right. The rest of him shook with shock but lived. I wrapped the limb in blackout fabric. More ritual than treatment. You're here, I said, though I was no longer sure what here meant. The loss of my oldest creed hit then not as panic, but as a cold architectural failure inside the mind. I had built a career on seeing to know. Now I understood, the act of looking could be predation. Our need to confirm identity was a door held permanently ajar. We can't win, Fard murmured. Staring at the black shroud around his arm, we can still deny habitat, I said. A scientist's last refuge. Change the environment. I hit the sterilization override. Halogen lamps in the ceiling screamed alive, flooding the bay with blinding white heat meant to neutralize surface pathogens. Shutters meant to block shrapnel and light both came down, dulling every trace of polish. Glass fractured under automated hammers. Mirrors shattered inward and were immediately swallowed by light-eating foam. One by one, reflective surfaces died, but I had seen too long. In the peripheral catch of a monitor, even blacked out, my reflection lingered half a breath late before vanishing. When the purge ended, the lab looked like a blind cave mat, lightless except for the angry halogen glow. Smoke from burnt insulation curled in antiseptic air. Bodies remained, alive but absent, motor plan stolen. Heine rocked silently, watching the floor as though afraid of any glint. I filed the only report I could into my recorder. Containment reached via full reflective purge. No physical agent detected. 7 cognitive cessations. 1 partial identity inversion. I could feel the entity-like pressure behind glassless walls. Patient as light, Fard leaned against the doorframe, breathing like a man back from drowning. Sana, it's not gone, is it? No, I said, and my voice was as calm as the night I took my medical oath. We've only turned our faces away. I did not tell him what I knew. Some doors do not close once you have seen through them. I shut down the recorder and keyed the final logs, knowing that tomorrow I would write an incident summary my board would dismiss as hysteria. Knowing that somewhere in any surface I forgot to cover, a version of me might still be standing blinking a half beat late, waiting for my next move. And I knew the next chapter of this nightmare was no longer about infection. It was about trusting any reflection, ever again. I wrote the report the way I had written every outbreak summary for 16 years in clinical clauses meant to survive legal scrutiny and academic peer review. Incident summary: 7 laboratory interns experienced catastrophic cognitive collapse following exposure to a non-material, reflection-dependent agent. No organic pathogen recovered. Physical integrity intact. Vitals stable. Consciousness absent. I listed every experiment: PCR, metagenomics, culture, spectroscopy. I documented the mirror maze, the sleep studies, the motor prediction hijack measured in milliseconds, the reflected chemistry that diverged from reality. I even described the halogen purge and the destruction of reflective surfaces. The language was careful. Non-localized optical cognitive vector. Reflection-coupled parasitic behavior. I included one sentence no reviewer would forgive. The entity appears to inhabit recursive light paths and uses anticipatory motor mimicry to overwrite host volition. The board responded in less than a day. They did not come in person. They called through the encrypted line, each director framed by polite lighting in distant offices. Their questions were measured, legalistic. Could this be mass psychogenic illness? Could interns under stress self-harm cognitively while believing they saw lesions? Could Farid's arm inversion be documentation error? I answered each as science demands. No. The timings were measured. The chemistry was captured in duplicate instrumentation. Catatonia does not sit up and write on glass. Then what are you asking us to classify? The chairwoman said finally. A novel class of non-material contagion, I replied. Optically mediated. Requires reflection to propagate, silent stretched. Someone coughed softly. Then the legal counsel spoke. Our liability position does not accommodate non-material agents. We will file under mass psychogenic outbreak. You will sign concurrence. It was not anger I felt then, but an exhausted clarity. For years I had trusted that seeing equals knowing, that careful work could tame the unknown. Now the organization that built its empire on data refused to believe the one case. That broke the frame. I will not sign, I said. Dr. Mirza, I resign. Effective immediately. I closed the call before they could turn disbelief into procedure. My apartment is now a mat cave. I have lined the bathroom with black vinyl so I can wash without meeting my own eyes. The television is gone. Every screen is covered in dull adhesive. I shave by touch. I eat facing a blank wall. Old habits die harder than fear. I still keep my leather journal, though I write with gloves on and without glancing at the ink. The first page after my resignation holds a single line. Observation can be predation. I avoid glass shops, puddles after rain, the gleam of car paint at night. Sometimes I tape over the small black lenses of appliances. Even a turned-off phone can catch a ghost image, yet avoidance is imperfect. Tonight, as I dictate this report from my own archive, the laptop sits closed but still black enough to faintly mirror. I catch myself mid-sentence, watching the shape of my own mouth in that glossy dark. The reflection is subtle now pale, a half-lit echo, but it moves first. My lips have not finished the word before hers have shaped it. She smiles a fraction before I do. Final note for the file. Science failed not because the tools were weak, but because the premise was false. We assume reality and image are identical twins. They are not. One only pretends to follow. Sometimes it leads. I used to believe every outbreak was a puzzle solvable by patience and sequencing. Now I know some are mirrors. They do not want solving. They want looking, and once you look, they own a piece of you. I stop the recorder, close the laptop, and sit in the matte dark. Behind the black vinyl, a smile I cannot see is waiting to finish this sentence for me.